Ever had a moment where you realized the normal way just isn't working for some students? What if discipleship was never meant to be one size fits all?
Well, today we're going to get real about ministry to students who see the world a little differently and why student pastors can't afford to wing it when it comes to neurodivergence. If you've ever felt unqualified or overwhelmed, you're not alone.
That is why we're bringing in Daniel, a 20-year student ministry veteran, doctoral researcher, ropes course trainer, and the guy every neurodivergent kid wishes was in his corner. And listen, I'm excited because he's not just a leader, he's lived this, learned from it, and has stories that'll challenge you to think about every student in your ministry.
Daniel's going to break down what every leader needs to know about discipleship on the spectrum, what's misunderstood, what works, and why it matters for every ministry. So let's jump in.
I believe that we stand on the verge of a historic moment.
You ask them what it is about rock and roll music that they like, and the first thing they'll say is the beat, the beat, the beat.
I found pardon for my past, power for the present, bright prospect for the future.
If you talk to the average teenager of today, I know what it does to you.
That could have an unparalleled and unprecedented impact.
I've got a story to tell. Have you?
Well, welcome in, everybody, to Shaping Student Ministry Podcast. As always, I'm Ian Dunaway.
I'm John Oliver.
And I don't know if it's below you, beside you, wherever, because there's three of us, and it splits it up weird. But we have Mr. Daniel Howell with us, who is a pastor as well. And Daniel, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. Just chilling.
Pretty excited. Rope course trainer. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I do. I work for Family Entertainment Center, and so we have a ropes course, and that means I'm the inspector, I'm the trainer. I do a lot of stuff with high school students, teaching them, hey, clip that person up correctly and stuff like that. So
I've never been on a ropes course.
You know, it's good. You
I've seen them. I've seen them. I just, being my size, not a lot of ropes I trust.
You don't realize this, Daniel, but John is 6'6", or 6'7".
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Is it 6'6"?
6'6".
It's 6'6". He's ginormous.
You're like close to our maximum height.
Yeah, and I'm well over the maximum weight. I can pretty much guarantee you. Every time somebody says something like one size fits most, I'm out of that range.
I feel like John, it looks like when he's doing that stuff, it looks like he's like a big person getting inside of a kid's house, like a little kid's playhouse. It's like he doesn't fit. What's happening here?
Yeah, that's in like most vehicles too.
I do. I think rope courses are cool. I have bad experiences because as a college pastor, I had a retreat with all these students and there was a ropes course. Go on it and found out because though I'm overweight and like I'm thicker than I should be and I'm trying to work on all that, I have no butt. And so anything that's like a harness pulls down on my pants. And what I realized was I did half a ropes course with my whole ministry below me. And I may or may not have been exposing too much from behind. And I just remember going, these are the trials in ministry. And I've never done a rope course since, but I think they're cool. I don't know. I think it's fun. Well, man, I'm glad you're here. And tell us a little bit about your story, about why you're here. I always hate telling people a story for them. But Daniel, tell us how there's nobody really doing anything for neurodivergent in ministry, whether that's ADHD. I know that spectrum that we're talking about is a lot bigger than we talked about this before we started the podcast, bigger than most realize, even me. What made you, and I love that we're getting to do this with you. What kind of led you towards all this?
Well, for me, I am neurodivergent. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in third grade. I have been on every form of like ADHD treatment that you can imagine, and probably a few that they have said, hey, that doesn't really work on you. So there are fun things with that. But like I grew up ADHD. And so for me, this area is an area that is something that I've lived. I know how it works and how it impacts your faith and your faith development. And there's so many different pieces to it that it just amazes me that no one's ever thought through it, right? Or there are some people who are beginning to think through it, but it's very early stages. And most of the people who are influencing the conversation, right, are people who would be secular counselors and things like that. And you need that sacred voice because a secular counselor looks at faith and says, isn't that like some sort of like problem that you have, that you're talking to someone non-existent there. When we approach it with neurodivergence, we have to actually bring in the faith element and say, no. Here's what this means. And with neurodivergence, that gets a little bit complicated for reasons that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time with us. And all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina. So you're over in God's country where they build the malls around the trees. And I kind of like that. When you drive, you feel like you're in the wilderness until you pull into a shopping complex. And it's like, it's here. It's Costco. But listen, we're excited to be able to do this. Listen, I have, oddly enough, in the last 20 years, I feel like I've had a more neurodivergent students than most have had. Now it seems many of us do, and always have been really thankful. I've had people I can call and connect and lean on, and even now in student ministry have neurodivergent students. And it's always, I know that everybody is unique in that, and that each part of that spectrum fits people in different ways, but it always amazes me how I think just how messy it can be. And I think that some of why you don't see a lot of believers, at least in the West, I think that in America specifically, we want clean Christianity. And I think as a result of that and clean discipleship, I think that we have in a lot of ways castrated our discipleship and our ministry method, because we just aren't willing to get messy with people. But it's a beautiful thing. Like, the more messy it is, the more difficult it is to deal with stuff, the deeper you get just as a pastor, as a leader, and a shepherd. And so let's maybe just start with this. What are the most common or in everyday language, so that everybody knows, how do you define neurodivergence for a student pastor listening? What does that actually mean, so that we're not misunderstanding?
Neurodivergence is a learning disability based on structures in the brain that did not develop correctly when they were in the womb. For example, and it depends on which form of neurodivergence you have as to which brain structures are impacted. They're still doing research on that. I was doing work on my doctoral that I was just shocked that some of this research they're just finding out in the last 5 years. And wow. So you have 5-10 years ago being the first studies that are being done on how this actually works and plays out. It's kind of amazing. But for purposes of student ministers, neurodivergence would be your ADHD, ADD, whatever you want to call it. We can either be the really, really crazy ones or the really, really quiet ones. And there's almost no middle ground on that. Then you have it used to be called autism spectrum disorder. I don't know what they're calling it these days, but ASD would be on that spectrum. Autism.
Is that spectrum what, like Asperger's used to be?
Yeah.
Its own thing, and now it's on that spectrum, right?
So Asperger's is now with autism. It's just it's like two different poles of autism. What many people are saying is that ADHD is a third pole of that. So you have like a triangle of crazy now that we fall under.
I'm sure there are, but are there charts that illustrate that?
I am sure you can Google one. I don't know exactly one that I would trust. And it really depends, because it's so theoretical at this point that they're still trying to figure out what parts interrelate and what parts are just could it all just be one disorder that's just over, has a worsening or bettering, if you want to think about that. They're still trying to argue about that in doctoral land and studies and research.
It's kind of the Wild West, it feels like, I guess.
It really is. So while you have some people who are starting to coalesce a framework to work in, most of those are people like how to ADHD's Jessica McCabe, I think it is, and other people like that. You have Dr. Ed Howell, who's been researching ADHD since I was a kid, and he's starting to finally get enough traction that they're able to do some extra research. It's just amazing to see, because there's so many different pieces to this. That being said, neurodivergence is any form of learning disability that impacts how they learn and process information, and then how they develop with that information. So most...
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Keep going.
So most neurodivergence will have some form of developmental lag of some sort that is really, really important to pay attention to, especially with faith development, especially in our ministries, because we plan around age-graded ministry. Well, age-graded ministry works well in 90% of the cases, but this is that 10% where that might not work exactly the way you're hoping it does.
And how you bring students along, that makes a big difference. Because you don't, I mean, maybe I'm wrong in this, but obviously you don't want to take a student and put them in a lower grade. You don't want to ostracize them in that. You've got to invest. I think we even talked about this quite a while ago, Daniel, that when we were just first meeting, how easy it is to ostracize students because there is a lot of investment required one-on-one. We have an amazing children's director at our church. We have 3 or 4 students or children on the spectrum, and she's a biblical counselor, and very good with students. And I feel like I've always had a good group of people that will support and kind of lean. I kind of an island of misfit toys student pastor. I don't know if there's any of you out there, but even when we had 400 or 500 kids in a student ministry, they were all island of misfit toys. So we built our ministry on this idea of every student matters, and that was a little bit easier to connect. But yeah, it's crazy to me, at least when we look at students and we look at the fact that, I mean, that's a wide range. And so what are some of the common traits that we're going to see in neurodivergent students? Because I feel like most of us are probably John, we're going to see ADD, ADHD. We'll see a form of autism. Is there more to that than just those main things for us? And what are some of the common traits we see?
Yeah, because I think the traits often, at least in my ministry, because we have quite a few students on the spectrum in different places, we kind of have to develop, we call them IEPs, individual education plans, in tandem with parents and kind of work through that. But it's so unique to me that, we really think, well, you pay attention to the uniqueness of the students when they're on the spectrum more, but really and truly every student that you have has a unique learning opportunity that you can kind of connect with. And so you just have to be a little bit more tuned in. Like, yeah, to Ian's point, what are some of the common neurodivergent traits youth leaders are likely to encounter?
Neurodivergent students will almost always present with some sort of social difference in that they don't often know the social rules or social cues that normal people pick up on. So, for example, like I was doing to Ian there for a second there, I will tend to interrupt if I've got an idea or something in my head. It's not because I'm rude. It's because there's a thought in my head, and I know if I let it sit there, it's just going to go straight out the back door, and it's not going to get spoken.
Yeah.
So that is the way that ADHD processes things. But even you're
speaking to every middle school small group leader in America right now, Daniel.
Exactly. See, middle school I get along with because we're all somewhere near there.
All middle schoolers may be on the spectrum at one point. We don't know. But at least that trait, we're saying it's right there.
But I think that's an important point, what you just said. You're not trying to be rude when you do that. You're trying to get your thought out. And man, how many students have we maybe gotten onto in the past that have just interjected something at a weird time? And it's because they felt like they had something to contribute that they needed to get out.
Yep.
And it was so bad that in 3rd grade, we had meetings with the developmental person. This was back in the dark ages of ADHD when they were just starting to say, oh, you have ADHD. And they said, hey, maybe we just need to hold him back a couple of years. Well, my best friends were in that group. If you'd done that, I would have never grown as a person, socially. And so there's so many different elements that you have to work through with ADHD as a parent, as a student pastor. There's so many different elements with that. Another thing that you'll notice is that usually, at least with ADHD and usually with autism, there's some sort of developmental delay. So your ADHD and your autistic students typically are between 1 and 4 years behind everybody else maturity-wise. We would call it maturity, but just their ability to grasp things tends to lag behind. That's not bad. It's just where their brain is at. So when I have a 10th grader who is still collecting Pokemon cards, I'm not freaked out that they're not engaging in things, because that's normal for them. Give them 3 or 4 years, they'll catch right back up. But that first area, especially in teenage life where everything else is changing and their brain is constantly changing, they're just looking for something normal and consistent. Consistency is the best thing you can give an ADHD kid.
Yeah,
because
that
they
that totally makes sense.
thrive off of that.
What about? I've always noticed, and maybe this is not something I should have noticed, but it always seems to me that when you talk, especially with autism, which we're seeing such an influx of diagnoses, and I think you and I've talked about that. Are they overdiagnosing? Are they not? Either way, there's just it's prevalent, and it's more prevalent than it's ever been. When we talk about autism, I've always noticed that autistic students, whether they're highly functioning or struggle, they're incredibly literal, and I don't know if that's the same across the spectrum, but like. Is it? I think that's something that throws. I have to reorient how I'm talking and connecting with that student when they come to me, like, to like at camp, student camp, just last week. I have a student. I love it. I do. His voice is so funny because when he talks, he's just monotone. And so he and we laugh with each other. We talk a lot. But he was just focused in, and he had this whole conversation about he likes a girl, but he doesn't know if it's really liking a girl. He's not really quite sure how to say it, and so he looks at me because of some stuff he's heard, and he just goes. He said, "Man, I'm not going to do the voice because nobody else is going to laugh at that." But it's just funny because he and I do it together. But he just looks at me and he goes, "I feel like a 9-year-old, but I'm 12." And I went, and I just kind of looked. I said, because I was like, "I just asked you about this girl because he was." Getting super angry about with this people, when he thought they were, because he can't read the social cues. They're fighting, like fun fighting at camp. And I pulled, and he just kind of lost it. And I said, "Stop, go over there, take a minute, breathe." And he was like, "Okay." And he just goes, then he comes back and I said, "Okay, what's going on?" And I said, it took me a minute to get some context. I said, "Are you trying to say you're confused like a child, but you're not a child anymore? So what do you think? Like you're having a hard time?" Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I see this in every conversation, but it was until it's been years that I worked with students that were more on that autism scale. But I think it's a helpful thing when they're so literal. Sometimes it makes it really hard. He's always trying to relate stuff. And I think that there's some of how we teach our Bible studies, how we engage in conversation. I think that so often, it seems to me that so often students with autism on that scale leave frustrated because we're not slowing down to take the time to understand how they're processing it. So I've seen that as a trait. I wanted to make sure I hadn't even asked you about that, but as far as
I see one of the traits I've noticed too is like students, we have more autistic students. They seem to be more task oriented. Like if you give them if you'll discover ways in which, and this is, again, we really ought to be doing this for every student. But if we can kind of discover ways where they can meaningfully contribute to a task that they can do repeatedly, that's typically where I've seen our students with autism really thrive.
Go ahead.
Oh,
No,
I would say
go.
every autistic student usually has a niche. They have one or two or three things they're really, really good at. Like they're so good that they make professionals look bad. All of the autistic students I work with currently have a niche that they are so good at that, like, a lot of them are in music. That in music, even professional musicians look at them and say, "What do you have? Because I want it." And that's because they are just musical. They understand beats, they understand rhythms, they understand everything. Now, if I can plug them into my worship ministry and they actually accept that, and I've invested enough one-on-one time emotionally that they've grown to where they can actually lead worship and they have a relationship with God that they can lead worship, they've found their place in the church for all of their lives.
That's awesome.
That being said, that is not an easy bridge to build, because while they might be genius at the actual technical parts of doing a guitar or drums or whatever that is, the other half of that, the building of leading other people, takes them a very, very long time because of all the social cues stuff. It's very hard for them to be the front man leader of a group. And usually when they're a front man leader of a group of people exactly like them, Island of Misfit Toys style.
Yeah, but you know what's funny about that is there's a lot of pastors that are that way. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of pastors that will surround themselves with leadership that is just like them. And so that's not in my mind, like, that may be a little more challenging for someone on the spectrum, But I think for the student pastor or for the pastor who has surrounded themselves with people who think exactly like they do, it's kind of a good challenge for them. Like, hey, you need to be surrounding yourself with people who think differently than you do, because you're just a better, well-rounded leader if you do that.
I think it hits on this point too, that when we talk, we try and the idea that in principle humanity is the same. So when we deal and I think so this idea that it's not like we're trying to fix something that's totally foreign to us. It's the traits that we tend to suppress or push over or don't deal with. And so I almost think we used to teach know, show, grow. We still teach this with our leaders. Know something, about students, get to know them, show that you love them, and then help them grow. And that was always the piece that was the struggle, because it was help them grow where they're at with what they need. And so maybe a student needs a Bible, and so that they can actually read a Bible. Maybe a student they need a little bit more help here, because we'd always talk about this. But I think that the thing that I love about neurodivergent students, the thing that I love about even what we're talking about now, is that they don't, when most students will skate by and just make you feel like something's going on and you don't really have to stop with them, you do. They're teaching a principle that you should be applying across the board, that everybody's different and everybody's dealing with different places and at different places. And you need to be able to help them do that. And so maybe we ask the question too, to help us see that. What are some misconceptions maybe that you see, and a few common misconceptions that leaders themselves bring into the room when they have students from ADHD? Maybe we need to parse some of these out, but ADHD to autism and all the neurodivergent spectrum.
So I would say that some of the things for ADHD that people bring into that, they've heard ADHD and they think, oh, this is just that kid who bounces off the walls all the time, who never pays attention, never. If you actually understand ADHD, you understand that if they are the restless kind, where they have to move, you don't see, I'm playing with a fidget right now, right? That's how I process the energy. So, right. So there's a fidgety anxiety kind of side of that. And there's different types of ADHD that are being researched right now. So some are more the externally energy focused, the ones that, you take your eye off of them and they're suddenly climbing the ceiling. Every middle school boys group. Then you have the ones that are that one kid in the corner who never talks, but he's just quiet, and you almost feel like he's like in some sort of like cloud of something, and you look over and he's thinking. What you just said set off about 15 million thoughts in his brain or her, and that thought cloud is just ever expanding. So while you may have just said one point that you thought was like a little side point, Jesus wept, that person might be in a whole spiral of thoughts down with Jesus wept. Does that mean he's emotional? There's a whole train of thoughts.
How beautiful is that if you can harness that?
Oh, yeah.
That critical thinking.
It is.
We're going to get into leadership training on the other side of the podcast, but I just want to ask you, how do you harness that? What's a good way for a leader to come? I mean, because I don't expect every volunteer I have to be an expert in neurodivergent discipleship, right? But I can help equip them to do better. How do we and to understand? Because I think if you understand it, you're probably 3/4 of the way to being okay with it and to helping. How do you help leaders what's a good way to help identify that and bring out those beautiful traits? Like I don't know if every student is very different, but I've had students where I help connect them with a buddy and that person's investing in them and helping them. And then I have students like now, because we're in a culture now where you're defined by your label, and that's just, you decide to never grow anywhere because you just have a label. And it doesn't matter if it's neurodivergence, doesn't matter if it's trauma, it doesn't matter what it is. And so the student that we have now, one of our students, I'll look at him and say, when he's going off, he's having to learn it was a big deal because he learned a little bit later that he was autistic, and he goes off on these tangents, and he knows that they're not helpful tangents. And we'll be talking, I'll stop and say, hey, but we got to call on the autism a little bit. And he'll go, yeah, you're right. And then he'll move on. And so we have those moments where it's like, I need you to redirect and do that. But in general, what are some general principles to help a leader who, man, they're able to be there a couple hours a week and they're doing their best to do that? How do they approach that?
Find ways to connect. Well, it's different. ADHD, it's find ways to connect to their learning style, whatever that is. So
Okay.
for your more inward styles, that might be having them actually sit down and reflect. Reflective practice is really helpful to that part of their brain because it forces them to sit down and build skills that you would normally build just from regular interactions. But because your brain is going 11 miles a minute, you're sitting there trying to figure out, okay, how do I, what did it, and you get distracted. If you can cultivate a practice of reflective practice in there, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. There are different resources out there, things that are very simple. For example, like here, I got a thing of marbles. One of my favorite things is when you pray, like drop a marble in, like every marble being a prayer or something to connect an external action or an external thing to what's going on, because that anchors them. That
That's
gives
really
them
cool.
an anchor point to move forward. So things like my friend Marco over in California, he has a whole series of things where you have a bunch of pictures and you have them tell the story of whatever you're working on through pictures. That helps them because then they think through the pictures and then they have to explain it. And a lot of times for the quieter ones, you have this, I'm jumping 6 steps ahead of everybody else. And then I come in and it comes off as like, you don't know what we're talking about. What's actually happened is they do know what you're talking about. They've already jumped six chess pieces ahead of you to where they are. And they're wondering why you're so slow. And then
That's fair.
opposite end of the spectrum, which is the more externally ADHD focused ones, and you have to find something physical for them to do. If it can be, it used to be you had like learning styles, right? Like everybody learned about, you have the kinesthetic style. You're going to plan active activities. This was a whole phase in like 90s youth ministry, right? We've got the active learning. That still applies to that group of people. They're going to learn a lesson much better if you attach an action to it, if you're up, if you're moving, whatever that is, which I think that's just boys ministry in general. If they're up and
Right.
moving, be learning. So that's that side with your autistic side of them.
What about acting? Like sometimes we'll have, just as for fun, because we have a younger student ministry, we'll
Yeah.
act out the verse. We'll create a small,
Oh, yeah.
like they love
That's
that.
fantastic.
That makes
That
sense.
is fantastic. So when I can get them to act out a passage, for example, our VBS next week, one of the things I love about the curriculum is that every day we're going to act out different portions of things. And that is amazing for younger students. It's very amazing for ADHD students and autistic students because they can internalize it and process it at a different level. Whereas if it's just someone talking at me, it's information, and information may or may not actually like get into my brain. It might go in one ear, out the other, not because I'm not paying attention. This goes back to misconceptions. It's like, are you paying attention? Are you paying attention? Well, I'm paying attention, but I'm paying attention to also 20 million inputs at the same time. This is why that kid in 3rd grade who was sitting there clicking a pen almost drove me bonkers, because I'm hearing that input at the same level as my teacher's voice. And so
A way I've heard that explained, because I've tried to understand that, and for me, like, I think very linear. And so if you think of a laser pointer, I can put my laser pointer on the wall and I can focus on that one thing. Whereas that particular student or individual, take that same laser pointer, put it on a disco ball and spin it. And everywhere that laser pointer interacts with the wall is the thing that they're trying to interact with or focus on, even though they may very much want to, like, that input's coming out of them in one way. It's just landing all over the place. And that's been probably the most helpful thing for me in being able to understand them, is like, hey, they are trying. They're just taking in information in all the different places. They can't really think in the same linear fashion.
Let me ask you. Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
That being said, when they find their thing, or that one rare blue moon where they are able to focus, they're able to focus at a level that'll put anyone to shame.
Mm-hmm.
Find their gift, their whatever their brain wants to learn about. You stick them in that lane, they'll beat out doctorates. They'll become the single-handed expert on that overnight.
Well, so as we're kind of drawing to an end on the first half of the podcast, but I do want to, there's a couple of things I want to ask, and they weren't really on, one of them wasn't on our questions, but I would, maybe they kind of all go together to sum it up, but there is this tension we feel, and not just on the spectrum, not just, neurodivergence, but just in general, with people being defined by something that they've been diagnosed with versus allowing that thing to shape them to become more and moving past that. I want to be sensitive to understand, because I'm not that, but to what extent you as a pastor, as a neurodivergent person, and we're doing discipleship, when you have leaders and student pastors and volunteers that are walking in to help serve these students, to what extent, what is our end goal? Like, is the end goal to surpass your neurodivergence? Is the end goal to harness your neurodivergence? Like, what are we really working to do? Because we don't want to stifle things that God has allowed us to be. We also don't want to stay where we're at, because whether we're neurodivergent or not, we know that we should always be growing and becoming more. What's the right perspective for your end on how we should approach that?
I would say understanding that we're each uniquely gifted. So 1 Corinthians says, hey, every part of the body is different. Every part of the body has its pros, it has its cons. With neurodivergence, you have a very clear list. With other people, it's not as clear. With other people, it's kind of like, hey, you're kind of good at everything, so I'm just going to stick you over here. With neurodivergence, it's not, no, you have very clear goals, gifts, and abilities. We need to map those out, and we need to help you grow in those, because those are what's going to overcome the shortcomings. Those are where you're going to be able to shine and grow and give glory to God the best, right? So we need to be very intentional about that. And it's not accepting a label or anything else. It's just realizing that you were created uniquely. God knit you together in your mother's womb correctly, because he doesn't make junk. And to an ADHD kid, to a neurodivergent kid, they need to know that God loves them as they are very, very much. It's a repeated mantra that they have to know, because everything in the world is telling them, you're not good enough. You're not there enough. You don't have this. You don't have that. You don't have a girlfriend by 16. You must be some kind of monster. You don't have like this or that or the other, or you didn't understand how to have that conversation, or you didn't understand sarcasm, so you must be like some weirdo or anything like that. So reassuring. God didn't make you as junk. He loves and cares for you. He has a plan for your life. That needs to be over and over and over again. Our unique design in Christ is important.
And so doing that, I mean, it sounds like the end goal is creating a believer who knows they're loved by God, who can share their faith, and who finds a place in the church and relates to them. None of that changes, but how we approach them and how we approach those that are in that moment is not, I love that. It's not an isolation because there's something wrong with you, as much as this is who you are. So we're gonna move past it. Like, we're gonna move not past it, but we're gonna use those things in order to get to where we're going. It doesn't change. I think that the hard thing is we look at that as it feels so different sometimes to those of us who aren't neurodivergent, and so there's this idea that it feels so overwhelming, and I think that overwhelmed feeling usually manifests itself in irritation or anger, because those are the easy emotions, rather because I think we read a lot of failure. But I think it helps us as pastors, it helps us as leaders, I think, to remember that that is the messiness of discipleship, and it's about the process. It's not about perfection in the midst of it. And I love it. At least that's what I'm hearing. But I'm excited to be hearing us behind the wall. We're going to talk about how to train leaders to be better at working with those who are neurodivergent. We're going to talk about creating safe environments and everything coming up.
Yeah. So if you're ready to go deeper in our subscriber only segment, Daniel's going to give us practical tools, how to train volunteers, spot red flags, and support neurodivergent students as leaders, plus his top recommended books, resources, and a story you don't want to miss. So we'll see you on the other side.